Okay, so picture this, a dynasty that ruled for over 6 centuries, a family whose name was basically synonymous with one of the world's greatest empires, and then, almost overnight, it was all gone. No palace, no power, no country. This is the incredible and often really tragic story of what happened to the last royals of the Ottoman Empire after their whole world just came crashing down. To really wrap your head around the scale of this collapse, you have to start with this number, 623. For 623 years, the House of Osman ruled. That's a family line stretching from the Middle Ages all the way to the modern era. An empire that, at its height, was on 3 different continents, and then, in the early 1920s, it just ended.
So how on earth did that happen? Well, the end really began with a nation split in two. After World War I, Turkey had these 2 competing centers of power. You had the Sultan in the old imperial capital, Istanbul, and then in the heart of Anatolia, in Ankara, a new revolutionary republic was being born.
And the contrast between the 2 leaders was, well, it was stark. On one side, you've got the last Sultan, Mehmed VI. He's in Istanbul, which he's occupied by the British. He was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner in his own palace, just clinging to the old ideas of the Sultanate. And on the other side, you have Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in Ankara. He's got the army, he's leading a new Turkish parliament. He held all the real power. The old world was on a collision course with the new.
And this was the moment of impact. On November 1st, 1922, a Turk's government in Ankara made its move. They passed a law that formally abolished the Sultanate, completely stripping the Sultan of all his political power. Just like that, after 600 years, the office of the Ottoman Sultan simply ceased to exist. All he had left was the religious title of Caliph, a leader with no country left to lead.
The Sultan knew exactly what this meant. He was terrified for his life, probably thinking he'd be branded a traitor by the new government. So, in a pretty desperate move, he secretly reached out to the British forces occupying his own city. In the dead of night, the last ruler of the Ottoman Empire slipped out a back door of his palace, hopped on a British warship, and just fled into exile.
So the Sultan was gone, but the rest of the royal family was still there. And for about a year and a half, they were just living in this bizarre limbo. But, Ataturk was building a modern, secular republic. There was no room for a caliph or a royal dynasty in that vision. So in 1924, the final blow came.
And the process was just cold and systematic. First, the caliphate itself was abolished, cutting the very last tie to the old empire. Then, every single member of the House of Osman, we're talking over 150 princes, princesses, and their kids, were declared persona non grata. Their assets seized. They were handed one-way passports, a tiny bit of cash, and then put on trains headed out of the country, forbidden to ever come back.
And this is the really heartbreaking part. A lot of them just couldn't believe this was permanent. I mean, they'd been the ruling family for 6 centuries, so they packed light. They left behind priceless heirlooms, fully convinced this was just some temporary political drama and that they'd be called home in a few months. They had no idea they were never going to see their homeland again.
So the family gets scattered all over Europe and the Middle East. Think Nice, Beirut, all over. And the reality of their new life, it hit them, and it hit them hard and fast. Sure, they had these grand titles and a famous last name, but they had no money and, honestly, no practical skills. The imperial family was about to get a crash course in survival.
It really makes you stop and think, right? What does it even mean to be royal when you don't have a kingdom or subjects or any wealth? What's a prince's title really worth when he's got to worry about paying next month's rent?
For a lot of them, the answer was just devastating. The stories from this time they're staggering. You had Ottoman princes washing dishes in Paris hotels. A princess was literally found begging on the streets. One prince had to pawn his watch just to get something to eat. The desperation got so bad that one prince, Ziauddin, actually took his own life. And maybe the most shocking story of all, when the exiled Sultan Mehmed VI died, his creditors in Italy seized his body and held it for ransom until his daughter could scrape together enough money to pay off his debts.
But here's the twist. Even when they were broke, that Ottoman name still carried a ton of weight, and so the family members became these unwilling pawns in global politics. Kurdish rebels tried to name an exiled prince as their new caliph. The Japanese tried to use another prince to create a puppet state in China. Get this, after World War II, some Zionist organizations even offered a prince the throne of Palestine, thinking it would help win Arab support. The family had zero actual power, but their name, it was still a tool other people wanted to use. For decades, the family was just scattered, stateless, and totally banned from their homeland. But as Turkey itself changed, so did the attitudes about its imperial past, and a long, slow process of reconciliation finally began. The return happened in stages. It wasn't until 1952, a full 28 years after the exile, that the women of the family were finally granted amnesty and allowed to come back. But the men, the princes, who were in the line of succession, they had to wait a lot longer. It took until 1974, a full half-century, before they were finally allowed to set foot in Turkey again.
And for the few who actually remembered their old life, the emotion of that return was just overwhelming. When Sabiha Sultan, the daughter of the last sultan, finally got back to Istanbul, she said these beautiful words that just capture that deep, unbreakable connection to a home she'd lost for decades.
But, so much time had passed. For most of them, the amnesty just came too late. The generation that was actually kicked out in 1924 had pretty much all died in exile. Their children and grandchildren, they were born in France, Egypt, America. They spoke different languages, they were citizens of other countries. To them, Turkey was just a place from their parents' stories.
And that brings us to today. The House of Osmans still exists. Its descendants are living all over the world, including back in modern Turkey. They aren't sultans in waiting anymore. They're just ordinary citizens, but they're grappling with this absolutely extraordinary legacy.
And the lives of the modern descendants have this surreal irony to them. So take Naz Osmanoglu, a descendant of the last sultan. He's a professional stand-up comedian in Britain. When he goes to Istanbul, he has to buy a ticket, just like any other tourist, to get into the palaces his own ancestors built and lived in.
He even uses his family history in his comedy routine. He once joked on stage that, according to the old Ottoman tradition, if he wanted to become sultan today, he'd have to kill the 16 relatives ahead of him in line. The fact that he can joke about something that was once a deadly serious part of his family's history just shows you how much their world has completely changed.
And so that leaves us with this final thought. The story of the Ottomans didn't really end in 1924. It just transformed. It went from a global superpower to a scattered family of exiles, from princes to paupers, and now to regular citizens and even comedians. It makes you wonder, what's really left of a dynasty, of a legacy, of an entire empire, when all the power is gone and all you have left is the name?